Genesis chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. For the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. Of the dust of the ground breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. So we've been talking since the beginning of spring. We have a theme for every season. And the theme for spring, as you may recall, is a fresh start. And we've been talking a lot about the process of creation, which I feel is the fundamental purpose of life. That you are given tremendous opportunity through the vehicle of your body, with a mind, with the ability to feel, with intuition, with a desire nature, with a willpower, to make something of your life. What a great opportunity, how cool it is. And you could sit and watch YouTube videos all day with people saying this is how it works and this doesn't work, and actually God said this and you shouldn't entertain these things, and everybody's sort of trying to figure it out. Well, that's a little optimistic. Not everybody's trying to figure it out. Some people are kind of just chugging along. I find it really interesting, to read a passage like that and go, on one side, on the extreme, you have people who go, that is exactly how it happened. It was a 7-day process, and God rested on the seventh day, and then to make man, he somehow formed the image of a human body in clay and then breathed into the nostrils. I mean, it's the kind of thing that looks great in an animated YouTube video. It looks really cool, right? It's like, yeah. Then you have way at the opposite end of the people going like, that's just complete fabrication, ridiculous. If you study biology, nothing works like that. It began as a single-cell organism, as an amoeba. The amoeba has the ability to split of its own as an asexual reproduction. And over millions of years, things evolved to a point where fish walked out of the beach, and then they became salamanders, and eventually, we had apes, and then now it's us. And that makes sense to that mindset. And the other people are like, you don't put any room that's just completely, intellectual. And who knows? Nobody can possibly know. Because if you think about how we figure out crime scenes, we have witnesses and we have evidence, and we try to figure out what happened. Why? Because the people who actually were there won't tell us. They won't tell us the truth because they don't want to deal with the consequences. But that's one thing that's kind of cool about human beings, is that we have the ability to gather evidence and try to figure out what actually transpired. But what's interesting is, like, even if we film this complete experience, only the 4 of us will go through it. So even if you describe it perfectly, the people who are not there can only get somewhat of a feel of the energy, but they won't have the feel of actually being there unless they were there. And clearly, there was nobody there at the time that this apparent thing happened. And I want to say, it doesn't even matter. What matters is, how do we apply biblical principles to a life that we're in right now, today? That's really what matters. These arguments about sitting down and having some intellectual scientist with ultimate degrees behind his name and somebody who's like the most respected spiritual being debate whether or not this way or that way. Maybe it's interesting entertainment. But I want to come away going, how can I improve my life? The opportunity to create what I want to do. When I was 20, I wanted to do that. When I was 30, I had different ideas. When I was 40, I began to go, this is beginning the second half of my life. Now I'm 56. I've got to sort of aim towards retirement. I have to be cognizant of how the physical body is changing. This is what I want spiritual guidance on. So I want to talk about the process, or what I understand, which you can take the information and assimilate it into what you believe and see if it's helpful to you. I want you to understand the nature of a spirit and soul. That is a really important idea that is not really at the forefront of our consciousness. And the idea is that the physical flesh body, like plants, is growing, peaking, and kind of beginning a decaying process. That's just how life works in the physical, the biology of it. But in the metaphysical, we don't really know because we don't have access in the same way, the way we perceive physically. We can see plants from the first time they sprout through the earth, and there's so much, reaching up to the sun, and there's wanting to fulfill a certain purpose, and then these certain plants, once that purpose is fulfilled, they just naturally begin to revert back to, the decaying matter. And our physical bodies follow somewhat of a pattern like that. With a clear distinction, you have a tremendous influence over how your body goes through your life. The food you eat, how much you exercise, how much you take certain recreational drugs or not, what you do with your mind, and what you fill it with. The essence of our truth appears to be a spirit, which is a non-physical or a non-material presence. And it resides in a physical body. And you can imagine that that's probably quite confining in a lot of ways. Because it appears as though a spirit in the non-material is able to travel faster, right? That would make sense. That there isn't limited by gravity and by friction and all this kind of thing. But maybe there's certain frictions and gravities that apply in the spiritual. But right now we're in the material. So we don't want to try to transcend the physical and just go, I'm just a spiritual being, because then we kind of arrogantly dismiss the physical. I teach, why don't you become a master of the physical? And in order to become a master of the physical, you have to understand how the physical world functions. And it's quite intriguing and complex. I believe it starts there's a moment of conception. And this is very biological. We know that the male part touches the female part, and if it just so happens it's the right mix, you have the beginning of a living organism. Way on the extreme of the religious side, you have that is a human being, and to mess with that is murder. I think that's very extreme. Because if you ever grow plants, you know that some plants kind of come out and they're not quite, they're taking energy from the plant, but they're not going to really contribute. So we as humans, we prune those off. We cut them off. That's not murder of the plant. That's trying to get the best of things. On the opposite end, you have people going like, it's my body, whatever's living in it, if I want to get rid of it, nobody should tell me otherwise. I think there's validity to both arguments. One of the very cool spiritual teachings that really changed my perspective on this idea of, birth and insemination or conception and abortion is that the soul does not enter into the organism immediately. Because why would it? There's nothing really to be gained from that. But if you're just going on strictly biblical energy, you go, well, there's life, that must be the soul. Maybe it's more complicated than that. Maybe because a certain amount of biology doesn't progress past a certain point, because there's certain defects or abnormalities, that the soul might want to wait to see what kind of body is coming together. So the spiritual teaching is that really it's up until 12 weeks in a pregnancy that the soul is kind of maybe popping in and popping out, but has not yet really committed to that body. And I think that's brilliant. That gives the individual an opportunity in the event of some sort of brewing irregularities. I know they do tests for Down syndrome. If it appears as though the heartbeat is not really irregular, there's the opportunity to abort the whole thing, not because I had sex and I shouldn't have and I don't want a baby, no, but because this is not going to be a contributor to the planet and to my life. Some people find out, okay, I'm going to have a son who's Down syndrome or a girl with Down syndrome. They go like, well, that must be God's will for me. You can do that if you want. I'm not sure that's God's will for you. This is where people they don't really know. It's like, well, this must be because why else would it happen? But like I said, if you grow plants, you see that some produce amazing fruits, and the same tree might produce sort of an irregular and somewhat, half-stunted fruit. And sometimes you bite into them and they don't taste good. So it's not like, well, I'm supposed to eat this retarded fruit, right? Because must be God's will. We've been given stewardship over the earth. Now, I think that the pro-choice argument gets a little bit like, I want to do whatever I want. And I really believe that if love is ruler of heaven on earth, then we shouldn't be just whimsically having sex with anybody. First of all, it's not healthy to either person emotionally. And second of all, there is the possibility of pregnancy. And if there's no love and there's no connection, then how can those people want to bring the child in? So we have this, well, I want to be able to do whatever I want. That's not a loving perspective, because other people are affected by you doing whatever you want. Way on this other side, there's like, well, if you have any kind of conception, then God says you must allow that to come to absolute, manifestation. And I don't agree with that. I think you're given a 12-week period to do your due diligence. It shouldn't be whimsical. And that's why I think it's a problem that this hookup culture is all about, I want to feel good, I want to have sex with this hot person, I don't want to have a relationship, it's just a casual thing. I don't think that's healthy for society. But the human soul then, after about 12 weeks, goes, this is a good environment, we got loving people who care about each other, or sometimes, I guess I got to go through this difficult situation because karmically I got things to learn. Whatever it is, I don't know exactly how that functions. But the soul begins to permanently, and then I think you start to get the kicking and the feeling of that there's an actual, not just a living biological organism, but an organism that has a personality. That's the essence of the soul, is the lifetimes that you have lived and how you have grown and what you have experienced creates the makeup of your soul, which makes us all completely different. You could say a spirit is like akin to a car. I have a car, but I have a Subaru, and you may have a Ford, and you may have this and that. And so that distinction of what kind of car and how it functions is like the soul. But the spirit is the overall term for the vehicle of consciousness in which we reside. And even if I have a Subaru Outback and I've treated it really badly, and you have a Subaru Outback and you've treated it really, really well, so that's also another distinction. Over lifetimes, how have you tended to the needs of your soul? Have you cared about love and light, or have you been all about selfishness and money and greed and anger and all that? And so your soul has become kind of crusty and somewhat prickly. And now maybe this life you're like, I'd like to smoothen out my soul. Okay, well then you have to study love. You have to live by truth. You have to let go of selfish pursuits and greed and all this kind of anger. And people go like, I want to do it, but it's actually hard. Yeah, because the soul is conditioned to be angry and greedy and selfish because it has functioned like that for a number of lifetimes, perhaps. So here's the soul that comes into a very very forming presence within the womb of a woman. And then it comes out and it's virtually helpless. Somewhere contained in that, much like if you see a seed and out comes a seedling, you go, somewhere there's going to be watermelons on that in about 3 months. You can't look at the seed and go, I see exactly where the watermelons are, or the seedling, and go, I can see exactly where the watermelons are going to be. It's because they're not there yet, but the potential is in it. And that is the mystery of life. So cool, so amazing. So out comes a little baby, and we know somewhere contained in that baby is lifetimes of experience and a personality that right now is very hard to access. So that's just cool. You're given the responsibility to create an environment where that personality can begin to unravel. And it takes a while. And there's a 7-year theory, spiritual theory, that the first 7 years of a child's life, there's a predominant focus on physical development and a less dominant focus on mental, emotional, and spiritual. Almost no spiritual development from 0 to 7 because kids are not thinking in that way. They're focused on being able to get up and walk, and maybe, kids want to do things. Let me do it. Their physical development is at the forefront, and that's correct. Which is why it's not great to try to get your kids at age 2 studying a second language and excelling at math, because we're throwing off the natural balance by which I believe the Creator said, like, let them focus on physical, teach them physical things, make physical challenges. Yes, teach them language, help them not to throw a tantrum. But from 7 to 14 becomes much more mental. So they're entering into much more educational situations, and they have to develop language and writing skills. And that's the primary focus. Their physical development continues, the sophistication of movement, of course, but the kind of leaps they make from 0 to 7, they're never going to make that kind of leap from a baby that can't even lift its own head to someone that can run around. Now they make tremendous mental strides from 7 to 14. Now think about the high school years, emotional. Tremendous emotional volatility in those years. People are beginning to feel sexual attraction for each other. They're trying to form friendships that are meaningful. They have some ideas that are really, different than their parents, and there's feelings about that, feelings of being confined in their parents' homes. So there's tremendous emotional development from 14 to 21. And then, as we let people vote and we let people drink, and they get out of the house, now they're faced with true spiritual development. What do I want to do with my life? What is the purpose of my life? What do I love? What is it that bothers me that I want to change? In any one of these 7-year cycles, of course, there's development on the other 3. But how cool that for the first 28 years, those are kind of really meaty, chunky periods where you're developing in this way. Which is another reason why we don't impose too much spirituality on people until they start to get into their early 20s, because it's not time yet. And you'll see that most teenagers are not really that interested. There's an occasional one. Now, when you do the kind of work that we do, when you come into the next life, you might be like, I want to get to the spiritual. I can feel it somewhere inside of me. And you'll meet some teenagers who are like that. They have a higher consciousness. They're a little more developed. They have a little bit more wisdom. They're a little more relaxed. That doesn't necessarily mean they're socially integrated. In fact, that's often the opposite, because so few people have that development. And if you are somebody who is that way, you may recognize that, well, why have I always felt a little bit like an outsider? That may be part of it. You're a little bit more developed from one life and you come into the next, and you kind of want to get to it. Now a beautiful thing happens at 28 and a half called the Saturn return. And that's an astrological period of about 2 years, at which point you go through a tremendous transformation. And you're launched into your 30s as a fully developed adult. Of course, there's lots of work to be done, but you've had your 7-year periods, 4 of them, you had your Saturn return. And I would say at that point, your adulthood is way more complete. So don't rush that if you're not there yet. Let that play out. Now, we're in a situation of going, okay, I'm a soul, which is a sort of an individualized personality, in the form of spirit, contained or somewhat confined in a physical body, which I accept that. In the nighttime, maybe I leave the body and I enter into some sort of a dream world or a metaphysical world. And hard to understand what that is, but there's definitely a lot of value into studying that. If you really want to study it and do some lucid dreaming or out-of-body experiences, you can do that. And I've dabbled in those things quite seriously, and it's interesting. But really, I'm mostly interested in being in the material world and being a master of it, and a master spiritually to the degree that I can. So we accept that the soul resides in the flesh body, and the flesh body is something that we must tend to. And we understand that it is on a path of deterioration. We can slow that down tremendously. Maybe we can halt it, I don't know. I'm not really focused on not dying either. I sort of figure well, let's just run this through. But what you can really do is understand how, with that combination of soul and physical body, do I now influence the molecular matter that is about me. That, to me, is so fascinating. That through the use of mind and will, and through the understanding of putting feeling into stuff, different than emotion, in other words, a strong and intense desire for something that is non-attached, will elicit a manifestation. So if you want to own a home, you know, it's not just a pipe dream. It's like you really want to own a home, you've got to figure out all the elements that have to come together in order for you to walk in one day and go, I own this home. But even if you own the home, and the home serves your function, much like your physical body, there's going to be a point where you no longer live in that home, whether that's when you die or when you sell the house. So we also honor the physical world as transient. I would like you to really take care of it, because putting love into the place you live just makes the thing godly. It just, cleaning it, keeping it nicely painted, having fixtures that you like, you know, that's an expression of love. Do the same to your body. And determine what you want your life to be about, and then create that. Now, don't expect that you're going to create a world that adheres to exactly what you want. That's a little bit of that kind of, there's a certain type of philosophy, like you can do whatever you want. And it sounds good and people get excited about it, but keep in mind we have to move within the parameters of where the society exists. You know, I don't believe in creating a secluded society. A lot of people have tried to do that. Certain cult leaders, so we're going to pull out of society and just grow our own food and have our own power source. And I don't believe that that really works. We haven't seen that much evidence that when you pull everybody out of society and try to, like, you know, gate yourself away from it, that somehow works. I like the idea that we're all on this planet together. So let's try to create our universe that fulfills a pattern of love, and then hopefully that influences other people. And if you find yourself wanting to teach other people about it, you find a vehicle by which you can do so. The Tarot is one pathway that shows you how to do it. And what's going to happen as you take on the number one card, the Magician energy, which is also the priest who is the conduit between the metaphysical and the physical, who has one hand up to heaven and the other to earth, saying, I call down the metaphysical energy and it manifests into the physical. So if you want to learn how to do that, you got to study it. You got to study, and what better place to study than the canvas of your life? You can look around right now and go, what I have created represents my level of creation. So my health and the amount of finances or abundance I have, and the kids I have, or the car I have, I mean, those physical things, the attitude I have, the potential I have, those all represent, so far, my development as a spiritual being in a physical body. If you want other things and you have not yet manifested them, you have to study how the process works. You have to understand, on something as simple as buying a house, it goes, I need a certain amount of money, I need a credit score, I need a house I like, and blah, blah, blah. And it's not that difficult when you have those things available to you. If you don't have them, it can seem impossible. Let's say you don't want a house. Let's say you want to create a loving relationship. Well, you have to study what is the basis of the beginning of a loving relationship, the middle, and the general progression of it. Just because you want somebody doesn't mean they're going to have a relationship with you. So there's a lot of information out there, and then you have to grow into that next level. I think it's so cool that they call the first card, the Tarot, the Magician, because there's a certain amount of mystery to how you make that happen, until it's not a mystery because you've learned how to do it, and you've become a master at it. Even then, there are some elements of mystery, because I don't care how intellectual you are or how spiritual or religious you are, when a sperm cell hits an egg, you cannot explain why something starts living. I mean, I can't. I mean, you can explain it biologically, but there's an element where you go, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you put a seed in the ground and out comes watermelons in 90 days. Like, we see it, we experience it, but we can't replicate it. We can't fabricate a seed in the laboratory, I don't think, that grows at least not decent watermelons. They might be all deformed and weird, but, you know, what I'm saying is God is amazing. I guess that's really what I'm saying.